Detroit. I did my fellowship at a fellow founded startup, Sift, where I was for a little over 2 years. And then left that startup, did a brief contract role with Techstars, also in Detroit, and then recently moved to Mexico City, Mexico. So I'm drinking from the fire hose in Latin American startups right now. But happy to talk about any of those things and VFA in general.
I think that's me. I'm not sure if Chrissy's able to join us, but I graduated earlier last year from UW-Madison Economics and Psychology. I'm currently in Kansas City, 6 months into my fellowship as a product manager for Super Dispatch, which is a third-party transportation logistics startup for car hauling, which is a mouthful, I know. So been practicing that one a lot.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate all of you all taking the time to give back and help the class of 2021 think about their offers. And you all will have time to ask all of these fellows and alumni questions shortly. But before we dig into that, want to give you a quick refresher on all things Venture for America. So we are a nonprofit. Nonprofits care about their mission, and this is what drives us as fellows and as a VFA team every day. To read it for you, VFA is creating economic opportunity in American cities by mobilizing the next generation of entrepreneurs, that's everybody on this call, and equipping them with the skills and the resources they need to create jobs. But what does that really mean? Why get a job with Venture for America rather than just going and getting a job at a startup on your own? Well, we'll train you for a month in Detroit, Michigan. Training camp's going to start the Saturday after 4th of July. Any fellow will let you know that the best part of this was getting to know the fellows in their class. But we can also tell you about the hard skill and the soft skill training that we received that exposed us to a little bit about a lot in terms of an entrepreneurial mindset in startup life. Even once training camp ends, VFA will continue to support you and support your learning. And so whether it's webinars or workshops in person, networking events or different resources that are exclusively available to VFA fellows, we want to help you achieve the skills and the leadership experience that you need to develop in your career. We have affinity groups and resource groups within Venture for America. They're called VFA Rise. These are groups that have been started by VFA fellows based on their identity group and their allies. And so these groups are organized, self-organized by race, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, and are led by VFA fellows. And we were just talking with Anne Marie about how the VFA Women affinity group planned a women's summit last year in Philadelphia, and they're planning their second summit for this weekend. Is that right? They're in Philly Formal?
That's correct. I wish I could go, but it's a little expensive to fly from Mexico. But yeah, it should be awesome.
So that's just an example of ways that the VFA Rise groups get together. It's also as informal as a group meet or a Slack channel to communicate with folks who identify how you identify. This next button here says network, but I think it should really say community. As a VFA fellow, you can feel comfortable reaching out to any VFA fellow or alum in the network, in our community. We have community and we have network at a local level, whether it's in your city, across the country in your class, but also the VFA community and network as a whole across the country. Should you come up with an idea that's keeping you up at night, VFA has the resources to help you develop your own business. And so as Tim will go into, he started a business with Venture for America. Whether you're in the idea stage and you're just trying to validate, is this actually a problem? Or you're raising money or hiring employees or growing, VFA has resources available to help you. One of the crown jewel VFA resources is the Accelerator. This is a 4-month experience that took place in Cleveland this past year. We provide your housing, food stipend, your office space, and programming to help you achieve an objective over that 4-month period. And lastly, creating an impact. We believe that you can create an impact on your job, you can create an impact in your community, and that startups are an amazing way to create jobs, as well as economic impact, and solve solutions, in our 14 cities across the country. When thinking about the VFA community, your class will make us 1,200 strong across the country. The class of 2012, they're just breaking 30 years old and breaking into their early 30s. I argue, right, as a VFA fellow and as a recruiter, that I believe that Venture for America is going to be and is one of the most powerful entrepreneurial communities in the country. I say that because we're just breaking 30, our oldest fellows, and people are already starting businesses, hiring fellows, generating millions of dollars in revenue, co-founding ideas together, investing in each other's companies, becoming leaders at startups, and making an impact in so many different ways. I'm really looking forward to the day, 10, 20, 30 years from now to see what Venture for America grows into, because it's truly just the beginning. Let's give you a quick overview on onboarding and match. So there are 2 units in onboarding. The first is how to become a VFA fellow and take advantage of the resources. The second is how to prepare for match. And so kicking things off, onboarding will take place in a Google Classroom as well as Slack. And you will log into both of these platforms using your personal email address, so that you don't get locked out of anything as you graduate with a school or a work email. A big theme is understanding startup roles and how your skills and your experiences align with those startup roles. In order to operate Match, you will see that you're going to need to polish your resume as well as your biography and your pitch. And so a huge part of onboarding is revising those documents to make sure that you're ready for Match on the day that it opens. And lastly, networking with fellows and alumni. Why go through Match in this process on your own when there's 1,000 people who, Jesse, if you have sorry, can you all hear me? Got it. My headphones are having an issue. Jesse, if you have accepted your offer, you will begin receiving onboarding instructions. One of the first instructions is joining the Google Classroom, and one of the first tasks within the Google Classroom is joining Slack. Feel free to email me if you're having any issues with your onboarding. And my general advice about onboarding is that, and Match, is that you're going to get out of it what you put into it. Now, everybody on this call that are the fellows and alumni, we've been a senior before, right? We know what it's like to be a senior, and balancing onboarding and Match alongside your senior year is tough. Balancing onboarding and Match alongside a full-time job is tough. But if you prioritize onboarding and Match and you reach out to fellows and alumni and learn the ropes, you knock out your assignments on time, and you really invest in this process, it will help prepare you for finding the right fit, not necessarily a quick fit. And so really put in the work. If you talk to any of you who have talked to me throughout the application process, you know that I tell you to earn your spot in the class of 2020. You all have done that. You need to earn your spot now at a startup as well. And so let's look at Match from a fellow perspective. You will see here that you can search along the side of Match based on city, size, and industry, as well as role. You can also look at things like the demographics of the leadership team, as well as their funding and company size. You'll see that once you find a position, for example, if you search for operations and project management, you can click on a specific position. So say this candidate engagement associate position is of interest to you. You can then learn more about this position. And should this position be interesting to you, you can then pitch the company. And a pitch is about the length of like a LinkedIn message. When you talk about why you're interested in the company and what makes you a good fit, as well as who you are outside of work. Now let's look at it from the opposite end, the company perspective. Just like the companies create a profile, you'll create a profile. You'll see that companies can see your school, your major, download your resume, read the first sentence of your bio immediately. And so let's check out Symbi's profile here. You'll see that they can read their entire bio. And if a company is interested in you, they can actually pitch you. And so all in all, you can pitch companies, companies pitch you. Once a company or you accept a pitch, you then begin a very traditional job process, just like any other job process. Venture for America just it makes it easier for you to get to that point. Enough talking from me. I'm gonna unshare my screen, and it's time to dig into some questions with our fellows and alumni. And so I've got a couple of questions that we are going to rip through in about 15 minutes. Then I'm going to turn it over to the fellows and candidates for you all to ask questions. So to kick things off, to the fellows, how did you weigh the uncertainty with Match with other offers that you had, if any?
Hi, can y'all hear me?
We can hear you, Chrissy. What's going on?
Fantastic. Sorry, everyone. I was having issues with my phone, so I had to shift gears a little bit, but I'll catch up on my intro real quick. I graduated from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill last year, 2019. And I studied biomedical engineering there, and I am now working for a small company in Baltimore that makes devices for upper limb prosthetics. And I think my biggest tip with kind of dealing with the uncertainty in Match is to do your homework even before Match starts. Right now, VFA, like the community directors, are working really hard to start building those company partnerships and see what the hiring needs are going to be for the companies that VFA has previously worked with. So if there's something really specific that you know you want to do that's kind of a non-negotiable, like for me, I wanted a technical role dealing with healthcare. And that kind of narrowed my view into a few key VFA cities that are really big for biotech and medtech startups. So I reached out to those community directors and said, hey, like, I know it's early, but like, do you have any leads? Like, what are some companies that might fit my skill set that are going to be up on Match? And, you know, if you get a positive response from that and you can go ahead and start laying some groundwork and you get the go ahead from your community director, I think that's a great way to deal with that.
I would also emphasize, I mentioned I worked before I did VFA. So my senior year, I was just applying to jobs with my resume and no real work experience. And one thing I would say is I know people have a lot of anxiety around Match because you join VFA, you don't have a guaranteed job. But the thing to keep in mind is that the companies on Match are already bought into the fact that you're a smart, capable person. That's why they're agreeing to partner with VFA. And that is such a leg up compared to cold applying when you're a senior and you have no actual experience and you have to prove to people, I'm smart, I'm capable, even though, you know, I'm 21 years old or whatever it is, however old you are. So just keep that in mind, is that it is, I understand the anxiety around it, but the companies on Match have already bought into the fact that you've been vetted by VFA. They know that you're smart, and then you just need to carry out that conversation and find a good mutual fit.
Excellent advice, everybody. Building on that, could you tell us, Wilson and Tim, about your Match experiences? What was it like going through the portal for you all?
Sure. Mine was an absolute roller coaster, and I think it's pretty atypical of the experience. Was late to get onto Match. I wanted to polish my stuff, so I didn't get onto like the late of April. Graduated early May, went traveling for a month after that, where I was taking phone calls, doing pitches 12 hours ahead in shitty hostile internet, which would not recommend doing, but made it work. Ultimately, nothing came of that. And I forgot to mention, I went to the Baltimore job fair, and I had 2 on-sites that came from that. Did it real quick before I left. Nothing came of that. So I get back like 10 days before training camp. I pitch 25 companies. Go into training camp as one of 33%, like a third of fellows go into training camp without a job offer. And then just continue to hit it. One of the biggest pieces of advice that I got from other fellows that I talked to was that if you don't have a job by training camp, to absolutely do not let it spoil your experience. And so I was very I felt no anxiety about it, because every day I would go back afterwards, like pitch more companies, follow up on stuff, make sure I was doing everything I needed to be doing. Ultimately, I pitched something like 45 companies. When it was all said and done, 15 were declined, 15 were in progress, and 15 I had never heard back from. But I ended up having, after those 2 on-sites in Baltimore for the job fair before I went exploring, I had 3 in the middle of training camp. And I just knew, I was like, all right, well, all this stuff that I've been working on just came down to one weekend. And so in the middle of training camp, I went to San Antonio, Charlotte, and Kansas City, where I took on-sites within like 5 days, all back to back to back. The suits were not looking too good after that, but and I ended up not getting a job. Super Dispatch was not one of the places I interviewed with. I went to Kansas City for another job, met a fellow who had a different position at Super Dispatch, and then went through a very accelerated interview process with them, where I met pretty much the entire company through video calls within 48 hours, and then accepted like a day later. So I want to emphasize that one thing that I was confused about is that sometimes it feels like the cadence is very like regulated, that we'll all equally progress through this. Some people find their matches right away. It's perfect. I would caution you to rush to find a job, even if it feels like not a great match, because I found mine so late and it worked out so well. Everyone's experience will be different. Don't compare it. Just keep your head down, keep applying to stuff. Never stop applying to stuff is what I would recommend. And that just know that these companies have so many things going on that there's really no way to know what sort of timeline that they're on, because they're all in different timelines. So the only thing that you can control is your own effort. And so that's what I did. And I think it worked out really well. I felt really positive about the entire time.
I don't have any experience using the portal per se, because it didn't exist, because I was in the first year. And I actually worked on the first iteration of the portal with Scott Lowe, who's another 2012 fellow. But the match process, the only thing I will add is not about the process per se, about like how fast you can expect interviews. Actually, 2 things. One is I did not have a job going into training camp, but then found one during training camp, and it was fine. So definitely no stress about that. The bigger thing is incoming fellows typically over-index on what the job is and under-index on who the job is with. So I would strongly advise focusing mostly on the culture and the people that you would be working with, and being pretty agnostic about what fairly agnostic about what the role is and definitely agnostic about what the company does. I was really set on working as an engineer at a renewable energy company, which I got through VFA. But all of my coworkers were much older than me, and it was a boring place to work day to day. Just wasn't incredibly fulfilling, even though it was something I was very interested in still in my free time and like nominally interested in as a career. Whereas my roommate and future co-founder, Max, he worked at an ad tech company. No one cares about ad tech. No one has a deep passion for it, but he really vibed with the people he interviewed with, and he really liked the culture, and he had an amazing 2-year experience. So that's, I would look at jobs that aren't that interesting sounding if you get a sense from the portal or from the website or from video with the founders, whatever, that like they're cool people that you want to learn from.
Appreciate y'all sharing those stories, and I'm sure fellows or candidates on the call as well as incoming fellows have some more questions about Match. We've got some other hot topics that I want to make sure we ask our panelists about. So if you have questions about Match as the end, please bring them back up because we can talk about Match for quite a bit. Moving on to everybody, to the extent that you're able to, could you touch on how you were able to live on a VFA salary?
I think we had the lowest pre-negotiated ones in 2012. Everyone was basically at 35 a year, and it wasn't adjusted by city. And you weren't allowed to negotiate during Match, which I understand is totally different now. Although Jacob, correct me if that's not true. I lived in Detroit. I had student loans, not like 4 years of undergraduate student loans, but not zero. And I was able to live in a 2-bedroom apartment in the middle of downtown in Detroit and pay off my loans and travel to other VFA cities just fine. If you have like massive student loan burden, like you had to pay for a full undergrad for 4 years, it's probably different. But if you're not in that situation and you don't need to like financially support anyone else, it's going to be just fine.
Yeah, and just to throw in that context, Tim, the minimum salary for the class of 2020 is $38,500. The median salary for Wilson's class was $47,800. That's the median, not the average. So the majority of people were clustered around that amount. People in technical roles and sales roles tended to be above that median. People in technical roles and sales roles make more money at every single organization on the planet. So $47,800 is the median that I would recommend you all expect. But I'll turn it over to the panelists to give some more color about how they lived off of their salary.
I want to add on to Tim's point. I'm glad you brought up student loans. I did pay for 4 years of undergrad and had some scholarships, but ended up graduating with a lot of debt. And it actually almost stopped me from doing VFA. And the thing that really helped me is I sat down with my dad and made a budget. I knew roughly what my salary would be. And I think it sounds much worse than it actually is. Especially, I studied psychology. My job prospects were like researcher in hospital making $35,000. So I never felt the pain of like, I could be making $100,000, and I can't really relate to that. But if that is you, I would say sit down and make a budget and just see if it works with any costs that you do have, like student loans. But I can tell you my loans are several $100s a month, and I was fine in Detroit, and it really worked out. I think maybe there's some give and take. Like I didn't end up insuring a car in Detroit because that would have pushed me over a certain edge, but just sit down, work out the numbers, and then I think you'll see that you can still save. I was still saving money every single month. You'll be fine.
Yeah. Jacob, doesn't VFA also require companies to provide medical insurance?
Absolutely. So it's a minimum of 38.5 plus health insurance, and there's often other benefits that fellows negotiate, whether it's equity, wellness programs, higher salaries, commission roles.
Right. Yeah. I don't have too much else to add. I'm not dealing with student loan debt, and I'm only taking care of me right now. So I am like lucky in that situation. But I think that the only thing I would add is just that the, original salary that you're offered is also not stagnant. Like after VFA, your main relationship is with that company. So if you hit that 6-month, 1-year mark and you feel that it's time to negotiate a raise, that's something that's very possible as
well. Nothing really much to add. I would just quickly say that eating out is very expensive, much more than you'd think, and that meal prepping, because I hate cooking every night, so I do it all in one day and just feed off these 2 meals for the rest of the week, and it's way cheaper and so much easier.
Appreciate y'all digging into the elephant in the room. And if anybody has concerns about, hey, is this opportunity for me given my financial situation, please reach out to me via email. I'm your guy to advocate for you, to clarify what these costs are going to be to and from training camp, your budget, all of that. So let me know how I can help you think through that. Next question, what skills have you learned by working at a startup?
I mean, this is a little bit of like a meta answer, not that hard of a skill, but prioritization, I would say. At a startup, there's basically an infinite amount of work that could get done, and that is like within your range to do. It's very much unlike a large company where like you sort of get work meted out to you, and then when you're done, you're kicking back. And so when you have an infinite queue, the most important thing is to prioritize what goes to the front, because you can't just work hard to complete what's in the queue. There's lots of other answers here. You can pick up lots of like varying hard and soft skills. Like you can learn how to sell if you're on a very small team. You can learn how to like hack together your own stuff or like use no-code tools, whatever. But I think that's probably the most important, like almost life skill that I have learned and then found valuable at all of my different startup roles. And I've worked in operations, sales, and product and engineering before.
I think for me, the biggest skill is probably self-advocacy. When I joined my startup, I was number 10 and there were 9 men. So I was the only woman, and it was like an okay culture. It wasn't awful by any means, but it was okay. So not necessarily what we strive for in life. And I had to really learn to speak up in uncomfortable situations. And I think that initial challenge of, even for being a pretty outgoing, confident person, I still had to really advocate for myself, ended up being a great professional gift, because that made me a better negotiator when it was time to raise my salary. It helped me get into product, even though I didn't have a technical background, and now I do product. So I think that's a common narrative in a lot of startups, is that you come in maybe as a generalist and there's a lot expected of you, which is great, and it's a great way to learn. But through that, like, I think I really learned to speak up for what I want and what I need from the organization.
Awesome. And I'm going to jump in with another question to keep the ball rolling. What are your career aspirations? How has VFA been a part of that?
I'll hop in. I've kind of figured out what product did like a year and a half before I graduated. And I was like, oh my God, how have I never thought about this? This is so cool. But it was looking like towards the end of my match that I was not going to be able to get that until, as I spoke previously on, the last turn of the river. And there I was with a product management role. And that was something that I thought was out of the realm of possibility. So it was really cool to be able to hop right into it. And then from there, these last 6 months have been awesome. We pivoted to a marketplace business, like a SaaS-enabled marketplace. And now the main, like, the marketplace PM left to start his own company at the new year. And so we've had a role that's been very slow to fill. And just recently, like this week, my manager kind of took me aside during my performance review and said, like, the hiring's going slow. We think you're doing a good enough job. We're going to slowly move you into this role. We're going to continue to look for someone outside that's experienced. But this is something that, like, I knew that there was a hole, and I wasn't thinking that it was going to be me, because I wouldn't trust me, someone who doesn't have marketplace experience, to do it. But I was really hopeful, and it gives me something to strive for. So that has been kind of like, whoa, that's so cool. And it's been really awesome. I kind of got off the question there. I forget it, but yeah. How have I liked it?
No, beautiful,
I loved it.
Beautiful response. Anybody else?
Yeah, I can jump in. I'll be honest, like, I'm still trying to figure out, what the hell I want to do long term. But I think that's one of the great things about VFA is, in my case, I came in with an engineering background, and with that kind of degree, you can kind of go into, quality, product development, manufacturing. There's these different siphons where if you were looking to work at a big company, you would be put in one of those worlds, and that would be your job. Here, there are 8 of us in the office. So even though my job title is more in that manufacturing realm, I do a little bit of everything. So that has been extremely valuable for me to figure out what I want to do, because you can get a little taste of how a company works and what it takes to get a product to market every step along the way. So I think that's something that's really valuable at working at a startup that you can't necessarily get in any other environment.
Awesome. Well, it is about 6:40, which means we're 2/3 of the way through this webinar. There's a couple of questions left, like, the highs and lows, the most rewarding and most challenging part of our VFA experiences. What's it like, living in our cities, as well as, different aspects of the VFA experience and how they've contributed to our professional growth. I threw those out there so y'all know what else is on the agenda, but I do want to leave some time for the candidates and incoming fellows on the call to ask their questions. In terms of, topics that are fair game, what we got out of VFA, where we're hoping to go after the fellowship, things we wish we knew, match, salary, highlights and lowlights. Nothing's off the table, because everyone on this call are fellows and alumni. So I'll leave it up to you all to throw some questions in the chat. What I'll do is I'll kind of categorize them if they come in, just so that we can kind of continue to structure the panel. But feel free to throw any questions that you have into the chat there, and our panelists will dig in. DK, Allison, Morgan, Carly, Adrian, Kate, Jesse, Allie, no questions? Morgan's typing, my bad, Morgan. I love that. I love that, Wilson. Congrats on your Super Bowl. San Francisco has enough fun. While we're waiting on Morgan's question, what was it like living in your VFA city?
I mean, I loved Detroit personally. It's changed a lot since 2012. It's definitely not for everyone, but if you're already in VFA and you're kind of like signed up for that type of city experience, then it's a great fit. You can really make a difference, and there's lots of places where you can help out. The city definitely still needs it. A lot of fellows end up in a lot of like pretty like influential places pretty fast. I think that continues to be the case. And Anne-Marie, is that right?
Yeah, I agree. I also really loved Detroit. And it was sometimes an unreal experience because, per Tim's point, VFA fellows have access to like more of the city than we deserve to have access to put it bluntly. But it's an amazing learning opportunity for that reason. You get to be super connected with really any leader in any field you can imagine. I have a lot of friends in Detroit who care about city planning and architecture, and that's a great city for that. But I also have friends who have totally different passions, and they got to meet with a lot of influential people in Detroit, which is amazing. I do not plan to go to grad school, per Allie's question, but I will say I heavily considered going straight into a PhD out of my undergrad. And in hindsight, I'm so glad I didn't. I'm very, very thankful that I decided to work and ended up in BFA. And I'll just keep going with Adrian's question. Did you feel you had a clear path from the fellowship? Yes and no. One thing I will say is that the fellowship gives you an incredible network for sure, but also an incredible narrative. Like jobs I was applying to post graduation, I had this really great story to tell. And I think that no matter what you want to do, whether it is grad school or start a company or go to a big company or another startup, people always ask me like, why were you in Detroit? Tell me about Detroit. What's VFA? So I think it's an amazing narrative that is different and super interesting. But no, I mean, there's not necessarily a clear path.
Are any other panelists interested in going to grad school?
I've definitely thought about it and very interested, but I caution myself against too quickly to jump right into that, because you should go to grad school with a goal and then reverse engineer that goal. And then you may find out it may not be necessary. That's what's on my mind, whether that be in the realm of psychology, cognitive science, or economics. But then also there's still so much to explore, so much I haven't felt, that I think to hop into grad school within these next 2 years, I think would be too early for me, because I'd like to see what else is out there.
And continuing on that, post-fellowship theme, is it common for fellows to stay with their company after the 2 years? How many change companies move out of their city, stay in their city? I personally transitioned to a second company after my 2 years, but I stayed in New Orleans. How about you all, Anne-Marie? Tim?
So I stayed with my company for the full 2 years. I think it just depends. Some people really quick in the first 3 months decided I don't like this company, I don't like the culture, or maybe they lost funding. But for the most part, my class in Detroit, I think almost everyone stayed in their same role. And I actually was the first person, which I'm very sad about, I was the first person to leave Detroit from my class, the class of 2017. And so that means everyone in my class is going on more than like 2.5 years now in Detroit. So I think in terms of changing companies, it's hard to answer that. But in terms of cities, like our 17ers in Detroit are really hanging on strong.
Yeah. I think it's becoming more common to both stay at your company and to stay in your city. If I wasn't like trying to start a company with a couple other fellows who were graduating at the same time as me, I would have stayed in my job. And I did end up staying in my city. And we kept Castle in Detroit for quite a while. I think for the older classes, it was a little bit tougher because there were fewer people in the cohorts. And so, if one like key member leaves, then that can start a bunch of people leaving. But now every cohort is much larger. There's sort of this inertia is kind of a negative word, but it's sort of a group inertia of like, well, if no one has any like really strong plans to leave, something that's absolutely pulling them away, then people tend to stick around. And then, you're such good friends with the people in your cohort that like you want to hang out with your friends. You don't want to have to be a freshman in life by moving to a new city. And so it has this sort of self-sustaining effect, which is great. I was just in Baltimore for Halloween visiting Moss Amer, who's a 2013er. He's been in Baltimore since the beginning. He only recently left his VFA job in the last 6 months, and he's been super happy with it. And I think that's more and more the experience people are having.
Carly, to give you some structure around how to think about this, at VFA, we have 2 programmatic outcomes. One is becoming a leader at a startup. The other is becoming a founder. So the idea is you accept your offer, onboarding, match, training camp, work at a startup for 2 years, have the community, the mentorship, the programmatic support throughout your fellowship. At the conclusion of those 2 years, we hope you identify as a leader at the company that you're working at. And we actually survey our fellows on this, and 60% of alumni identify as leaders at the company they work at. Now, no one's going to kick you out of the door now that your 2 years are coming up. It's an artificial deadline just because your fellowship has concluded and you now become an alumni. It's not like college, right? You might have a performance review because it's 2 years into you working there, or your boss might say to you hey, what are you thinking about doing after your fellowship? It's more of a checkpoint than anything else. I want to hold off on the founder outcome because I want to dig into Morgan's question. So Morgan said that at selection day, a lot of people are like, hey, I already have a startup, or I'm generating revenue, or I've been through an accelerator. And Morgan doesn't, subscribe to this same experience. And so our question is, did any of you guys start with VFA not wanting to start your own company one day?
Definitely not. There was actually, I think Andrew did a poll during training camp. He was like, how many people here definitely or possibly want to start their own company one day? And I'm pretty sure I didn't raise my hand, even though most of the other people in my class did. But then it turns out I ended up starting 2 things, rehabbing this house and then starting a full-on venture-backed startup. I feel like it's becoming more common for people to get that experience in college. And so VFA has a bigger brand name. It makes sense that those people are ending up in VFA, but it's definitely not a requirement. You don't need to have that or any business experience, which I did not before the fellowship, to be successful in the fellowship, whatever that means to you. It doesn't necessarily mean founding something. People have the valuable experience that they want out of it. And it has honestly surprisingly little to do with what nominal entrepreneurship things they had done before VFA.
Yeah, I really like that question, Morgan. And just for context on my background, so I studied psychology. All of my internships in college were in nonprofits and schools, mainly working with children. And I didn't know anything about business, and I also didn't really care about business, but I cared about impact, and I cared about creating opportunities for people. And so that's why I really wanted to do VFA. And so even though there were people around me who studied business and knew they wanted to be leaders of giant companies someday or start their own startups, I still felt like I fit in because I cared about impact and job creation. And that narrative still holds true for me. I don't really like business that much still. I like it a little more, but I care a lot about impact and about creating opportunities for people. So that narrative has always stayed true for me. And I definitely think if, you have your own version of what sticks out to you about VFA, then hold on to that as truth. And it doesn't matter if you started a lawn mowing company in college or something, which I think is what a lot of the businesses are most of the time, which are cool, but it doesn't have to be your story.
I wanted to speak to Danielle's question about other fellows living with other fellows. Kansas City is the newest VFA city, clocking at 14 or 15. We have 11 people here, 1 from 2017, 2 from 2018, and then 8 from my year. And because I got my offer so late, most of them all live together. I, however, do not. I live with two guys that I was connected to through another 19er who knew an 18er who was best friends with this dude from Texas. And then these two guys that I live with are not in the program. They've been best friends for a while, and it's worked out awesome. I think a lot of places, I don't want to say suffer, but it's really easy to stay within the VFA community, which is not a bad thing at all. But for me, I knew that I wanted to have different outlooks in my life and just different groups of people. Having moved a couple times in my life, knowing no one, I kind of knew what to do there. And so it was a natural step for me to live with these guys. It's going great. The events, we kind of throw our own events. Every city has their own big, like we have Coachella, which is KC Coachella, which is the first year that we're having it. You should all come check it out. If I guess to the current ones, it'll be awesome. It's like a music festival. Every city pretty much has that. We have local stuff. We have self-organized a founder series where we'll meet with founders of local startups here every 3 weeks or a month and talk to them. We go out to startup events in the community together. It can be as close or as distant as you like to make it.
Yeah, I was going to go ahead and jump to Adrian's question because I'm from Charlotte, North Carolina, which is also a VFA city. And something that I think has been really exciting about VFA's growth is there's been a real shift to pull talent from VFA cities versus kind of Ivy League institutions. So I think it's totally up to you whether or not you want to stay in Cleveland. Like you love Cleveland. It sounds like you're invested in the city. It might be really awesome for you to be a part of that economic development. But for me, for instance, like Charlotte is a big financial district. There wasn't a ton of companies like within the industry that I wanted to be in. So I really think it just depends on your career goals, but it is, I'm sure, like very impactful. Like I still, Charlotte's my home in a lot of ways, so I care about that city's growth and trajectory. So, if you get a chance to take part in it, like I say, go for it.
Yeah, I'd also add that, once you're a fellow, you're always a fellow. And so I spent 4 years in New Orleans, which is not my home, but I moved back to Columbus. And when I was moving back to Columbus, I looked at jobs within Venture for America's network. And I'm a Slack, an email, a text away from so many fellows and alumni in Columbus that should you want to get a job in Cleveland, Adrian, or in Baltimore, Allison, one day, you're a VFA fellow and you'll be able to get a job. So use that as a preference or a non-preference in match, but you can always boomerang back to your hometown. Any other questions? I did want to follow up a little bit on Morgan's question about the founder path. So 30% of VFA alumni have started a business with VFA. 13% of VFA alumni are still working on those businesses. I think this concept of this startup leadership path is very important because back when Tim and I came through the program, the expectation was you're going to start a business as soon as you're done with the fellowship. That was just kind of their hypothesis of what the fellowship would produce. But whether you're loving your job at your startup or you're this ain't for me, or any other reason, right? You don't have an idea. People weren't starting businesses at the rate that they expected. That's not a bad thing because especially with the younger classes like Anne Marie's, 2016, 17, 18, they're staying at their companies and they're developing into leaders. And I think a really cool thing to think about is there's a lot of people out there starting businesses that aren't leaders. And that's a huge problem with entrepreneurship is like these people have possibly never worked in a business before, never worked in a startup, don't have experience managing people or leading people or focusing on inclusion, raising money. And so that's a gift of this program, that you all get to learn to become leaders, so that when you have that idea, you can take advantage of the validation challenge or the accelerator or your co-founders within the VFA community to pursue that idea. Morgan asked, as fellows also using the same match portal and pulling from the same Rolodex, are you competing with each other directly for jobs? Have there been startups in the network that hire multiple fellows at once from the same year? To clarify, you are not competing with us as alumni or fellows on Match, only your class. Competing, yeah, right? Like, if there's a startup that only needs one salesperson, then they're only going to hire one salesperson. But it's not like they're restricted to only hiring one person. I mean, I joined Dinner Lab with 2 other fellows in my class, so there were 3 of us that joined. I think like 8 went to ZeroFox my year, which is like, I don't know if they allow that to happen anymore. But like growth companies can hire multiple fellows, and sometimes, right, they might need 2 people on the sales team, or sometimes they might talk to you, Morgan, and be like, oh, like, we're hiring you for this operations position. We're interviewing you for this operations position, but like, you sound like you could crush data. Like, let me introduce you to like the head of the data team. And so I think that's why it's very important to pitch a lot of companies. This is an amazing learning opportunity just going through Match itself. When else in your life are you going to have a portal to log into with jobs to apply to exclusively for you? And like Anne-Marie said, like, you're already in their door. Like Wilson said, pitch 25, 40 companies. I pitched 30, right? I ended up with 3 offers. And so pitch a lot, pitch early, be open, be flexible. We know you have preferences like Christy might have had, but I really recommend that you listen to Tim's wisdom in terms of what you think is really important is probably not as important that as you think it is. Like, we've all been 22 once, and I think a gift of being 22 and also 28 like me is you really don't know what you don't know. And so have preferences, but be flexible. This is an amazing opportunity to go on to Match. Any other final questions before we sign off at 7 o'clock Eastern sharp? Well, I just want to say thank you to all 4 of you all for volunteering your time, giving back to the VFA family. Appreciate y'all sharing your stories. Y'all, this is really just the tip of the iceberg in terms of the VFA community. Just like you've heard wisdom from a 2012 fellow all the way as young as a 2019 fellow, continue to chat with other fellows. Tim's throwing his email. Everybody's throwing their emails out here. Feel free to reach out to any of us, especially me, if you want to talk about any of like the financial or identity-based questions. I'm here for you to help you think about these things. Continue to put in the time to think about if this is the offer for you, to prepare for Match, do your onboarding. We want nothing but the best for you all in terms of accepting this offer or declining it, as well as going into onboarding and Match. So I'll throw my email in the chat as well, and we will sign off because it is 7 o'clock p.m. Eastern. Thanks for volunteering your time and attending, everybody.
Woohoo, we did it!
Thanks, y'all. Appreciate your time.
Yep.
Everyone.
See y'all.